Be mindful of the energy you invite through curiosity and intent. The thoughts you dwell on, the emotions you stir, these have weight. Fear especially has a way of drawing things in. There are entities that thrive on it, feeding on what you've already given them, twisting it into something more. But fear is not the only force in this universe. I've never heard of the Hatman until recently, but my brother used to see shadow people. When he was a kid, he had 2 imaginary friends. They weren't normal imaginary friends, though. He never imagined them talking or playing games with him like other kids did. They were just there. He would describe them as 2 distinct heads with shoulders, but their bodies melted into a single mass. They always stayed in the same spot, a stretch of wall in his bedroom where the closet met the ceiling, an awkward corner of the room where the light never quite reached. He'd lie on his bed, staring at them, whispering about whatever nonsense was on his mind. Sometimes he thought they whispered back. He told our mom once, and she just laughed, said it was cute, called them his little buddies, said it was just his imagination. He stopped seeing them when he started school. He didn't really think about them much after that. Life got busier, and he had real friends. But sometimes, years later, he'd catch something in the corner of his eye, something shifting in the dark when he turned his head too fast. It was never clear, never enough to make him sure he saw anything at all, just enough to make his stomach knot up. Years later, something happened that made him believe it had never been his imagination. We were staying at his ex's parents' house for a weekend. They had a place in a quiet part of town, an old 2-story house with a big yard and a deck that backed up to a line of trees. That night, everyone was gone except for him and me. His ex was upstairs watching TV, and we were outside, sitting on the deck. He was mid-sentence when he stopped talking, cigarette frozen halfway to his lips. I watched his face change, all the color draining from it. His eyes locked on something over my shoulder. I turned, but there was nothing there, just the backyard. He asked me if I could see what he was seeing. I didn't, but the way he was looking, his whole body tense, fingers trembling just slightly, told me he had. He didn't say anything else for a long time, just kept scanning the yard like he was expecting something to step out of the dark. When we finally went back inside, he was different, jumpy, kept glancing toward the sliding glass door like something was watching us. That night, he didn't sleep. Nothing else happened, at least not that I noticed. The next morning, he looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his face drawn and pale. He wouldn't talk about it, just shook his head whenever I asked. A few years later, my brother got sick. It was bad. We all knew where it was heading, but no one wanted to say it out loud, least of all him. At first, he did what he always did, brushed it off, made jokes, acted like it wasn't a big deal. But as the days stretched on, something in him shifted. He got quieter, more distant. The light in his eyes started to fade. One night, he told me the shadows were back. He said they had been waiting for him. They were calling him just like before. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell him it was just the sickness, just exhaustion warping his mind. But the way he said it, so matter-of-fact, so certain, made my stomach twist. And it wasn't just the words. It was how he looked when he said them. He stopped sleeping after that. Or if he did, it wasn't restful. His eyes would dart around the room, tracking something I couldn't see. Sometimes his breathing would hitch, like he was startled. Other times he'd go still, tense, like he was waiting for something to happen. The worst was the way he would flinch, like someone had just whispered something too close to his ear. I'd sit with him, pretend not to notice, act like everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. Not for him. His last few days, he barely spoke, just lay there, staring past me, his face pale and drawn. He wasn't afraid anymore. That was the worst part. Whatever he was seeing, whatever had been waiting for him, it was familiar now. I was with him when he went. I held his hand, told him he wasn't alone, but he wasn't really listening to me. His gaze had locked onto something just beyond the foot of his bed. His lips parted slightly, like he was about to say something, but no sound came. And then he was gone. I don't know what he saw in those last moments. I never saw them myself, but I saw him. I saw the way his eyes followed something I couldn't track. I saw the way his shoulders tensed, then eased, like someone had finally taken him by the hand. Maybe it was nothing, just the mind slipping at the end. At least that's what I want to believe. Okay, so I've read a lot about the Hatman online, but I only had one experience with it, just once. That was enough. I woke up from a nightmare in the middle of the night, completely drenched in sweat, and that's when I saw it. Standing at the edge of my bed, just standing there. It was tall, way taller than any person should be, with broad shoulders and a long, wide-brimmed hat like something out of an old Western. But it wasn't just a shadow. I swear it had depth, like it wasn't standing in the dark but was actually made of it. It was the deepest, blackest thing I've ever seen. I tried to look at its face, but there wasn't one, just that endless void where features should have been. My stomach dropped, and before I could even think, I screamed, like full-on horror movie scream. The second the sound left my mouth, it just disappeared. No fading, no movement, just gone. I bolted downstairs, still shaking, and found my dad sitting at the kitchen table. His face was pale, eyes red. He told me he had just gotten a call. His best friend's dad had passed away. He was upset, crying, and it felt too weird to be a coincidence, but I didn't say anything. A few days later, I finally worked up the nerve to ask my dad if he had ever seen anything like what I described. He froze, like actually froze, then went quiet for way too long. And then he told me a story I had never heard before. When he was a kid, he was watching a movie with his family. At some point, he got up to use the bathroom. He climbed the stairs, turned the corner, and at the top of the staircase, it was just standing there. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there. He said he was paralyzed, completely terrified, staring at this thing until, without a single movement, it just wasn't there anymore. He ran downstairs screaming that there was a man in the house. His family searched everywhere. Nothing. Now here's the thing. My dad grew up in a really rough home. He doesn't talk about it much, but I know enough to say it was bad. I, on the other hand, had an amazing childhood. My dad treated me like a princess. Seriously. I was that kid who had $1 million and got tucked in every night with a bedtime story. I never experienced anything close to the kind of fear and stress he went through growing up. And yet, I still saw it. I've read that the Hatman appears to people who are dealing with trauma like it's drawn to negative energy. Some say it just watches, others think it feeds on fear. If that's true, then why did I see it? Why did it show up in my room in a house filled with love? Now don't get me wrong, I'm not someone who jumps straight to paranormal explanations. I know sleep paralysis is a thing. I know hypnopompic hallucinations are super common, especially when you wake up suddenly. That whole waking up from a nightmare and seeing a shadow person thing? Classic sleep paralysis symptom. But here's what I can't explain. How did my dad and I see the exact same thing, decades apart? Same description, same feeling of overwhelming terror, same way it just disappeared without a trace. I don't know if it's just a trick of the brain or something else, but if you start looking into it, prepare to lose some sleep. I've been seeing shadow people for as long as I can remember. Not always clearly, but enough to know when I'm being watched. They never look totally real. Never solid, never in direct sight. Most of the time, I'd only catch glimpses. Sometimes I'd feel them before I see them. Some felt harmless, others didn't. I never knew they had a name, not until recently. The Hatman, though? That's different. That's something I wish I never saw. When I was 10, my childhood best friend's dad lost it one night and killed his entire family. Murder-suicide. I didn't understand it at the time, but I knew something terrible had happened. The next time I passed their street, I saw something standing on the corner. It was a man, or something shaped like one. Tall, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow so deep I couldn't see a face. I pointed it out to my mother, but in the second I looked away, it was gone. Every once in a while when I passed that street, I'd see it again, and then one day, It just stopped. I convinced myself I imagined it, that it was just my way of dealing with what had happened, till years later, when I saw it again. I was in university by then, living in a rundown old house with a few roommates. I moved in early to fix up the place before the semester started. It was an old house, creaky, not in the best shape, but cheap. I didn't mind. I liked having space to myself. The first night, I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing noises, shuffling, faint knocks, but it was an old house, probably just settling. The second night, I noticed deep scratches on the floorboards in front of my closet. I hadn't seen them before. They weren't scuff marks from moving furniture. They were long, uneven, like something had clawed at the floor. They led right up to the closet door. I told myself they had always been there, that I just hadn't noticed. That night, I woke up to a sound. Not knocking this time, but a loud, sudden bang, like something had slammed against the closet door. I turned toward the closet. The door was still shut, but something was definitely inside it. I held my breath, waiting, hoping it would stop. The door gave a sudden sharp jolt, like something had thrown its weight against it. The closet door creaked open an inch. I didn't wait. I lunged for the light, flipping it on as fast as I could. The room was empty. The next morning, I bought a crucifix from church, had it blessed, and hung it on the closet door. It never opened again. But I still heard the knocks, always at 2 a.m, always slow, rhythmic. I don't know what was inside it. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe it was something else. Either way, I moved out as soon as I could. Never told my roommates. Never looked back. Sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I can still hear the knocking. And for a split second, I wonder, if I went back and opened that door, would something still be waiting? I've seen the man in the hat for years, but I only really started noticing him during the lockdowns. Being stuck inside, alone with my thoughts, did things to me. Depression, anxiety, whatever you want to call it. I felt like I was drowning in it. Sleep was a joke. My mind wouldn't shut up, and every day blurred into the next. I guess we all felt that. That's when he started showing up more. Stands in the same spot, watching always at a distance. A figure in a long coat, hat pulled low enough to hide his face. But I don't feel afraid. If anything, I feel like he's watching over me, not in a threatening way. His presence is almost comforting, like he's keeping something worse from creeping in. Lately, though, I've seen others. They don't stand still like he does. They move, quick, jittery, ducking out of sight the second I try to focus on them. Their shapes don't feel right, stretched and wrong. But even then, I don't get the sense that they mean harm. It's more like curiosity. I mentioned it to a friend once, expecting them to brush it off. But instead they just said, if you don't feel threatened, then they probably aren't shadow people. And now I can't stop thinking about that. If they aren't shadow people, then what are they? I had an experience with shadow figures last year, and while I'm almost certain it was just sleep paralysis, it still sticks with me. I had a bad fall and broke my hip. Recovery was slow, frustrating, and worst of all, I was stuck in bed for weeks. The days blurred together, and the nights felt like they stretched on forever. Even when I did manage to drift off, it was light, restless sleep, like my body was never fully shutting down. One afternoon, I must have dozed off because I woke up to the sound of whispering. It was faint, like people talking in another room, too quiet to make out words. Murmuring was unmistakable. At first I thought the TV had been left on, but as I blinked myself awake, I realized something wasn't right. There were figures in the room, thin shadows moving around slowly, almost like they were going about their business, paying no attention to me. They weren't solid, but they weren't nothing either. My eyes couldn't fully focus on them, as they flickered in and out of existence the second I tried to look at them directly. I didn't get the feeling they meant any harm. If anything, it felt like I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to. Like I had woken up at the wrong moment and caught a glimpse of something beyond me. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't respond. I could only watch as the figures moved around for a few more moments before slowly fading away. As soon as they were gone, I was able to sit up again. I know it was probably sleep paralysis. I was exhausted, in pain, and my mind was foggy from medication. But I used to see shadow figures a lot when I was younger, standing in doorways, moving in hallways, even climbing walls. And now, nothing. I can sit in a dark room, stare into the hallway, and see nothing. Maybe my house is just well built. No drafts, no infrasound playing tricks on me. Or maybe my brain just isn't looking for them anymore. People say shadow figures, Hatman, thin men, all of them, are just the result of exhaustion, sleep paralysis, or how our minds try to fill in the blanks when we don't fully understand what we're seeing. I want to believe it was just my brain misfiring. I really do. The part that gets me, everyone describes them the same way. What if they aren't hallucinations? What if they're a memory? Something buried deep in us from a time when we were still huddled around fires in the dark, looking out into the night, knowing something was watching. Maybe that fear never left us. If you feel something watching, something calling, step away. Close the door before it opens too wide. Not all invitations can be taken back so easily. Let go of the fear, embrace the light, and know that in doing so, you shield yourself. You are stronger than what lingers in the dark. Thank you for watching, and click on the next video for more true scary stories.